It's often said that with electric vehicles, you can go fast or you can go far, but you can't do both. And that is true in most instances. However, the Porsche Taycan is one of those electric vehicles that may be the exception to the rule. It has very good driving range. And it has very good driving range even at highway speeds. It's very aerodynamic, and Porsche has designed it for highway speeds. It is a Porsche after all, so they know the owners are probably going to drive maybe a little faster than the average driver does of the average automobile. It also recharges incredibly quickly. So 10 or 15 minute pit stop on a road trip can add 150, 200 miles of driving range. Now, I recently did a 70-mile-an-hour highway range test with a 2025 Porsche Taycan 4. I've done a lot of Porsche range tests, but this was a winter range test. Wanted to see how far the Taycan 4 would go in colder temperatures, because as with all electric vehicles, the batteries don't perform as well when they're cold. And in addition, you're using cabin heat, which also takes some of the energy. So that 1-2 punch of the batteries not performing well, and also energy going to your climate for the vehicle, really reduces the driving range. So I asked Porsche if I could have a Taycan 4 to do a winter range test, and they obliged and gave me one. And we also outfitted the vehicle with winter tires, the Pirelli P0 winter tires. So we wanted to make sure that we really replicated what the average Taycan owner that lives, say, in a northern climate and would put winter tires on the vehicle, what they would experience at highway speeds. So I did a 70-mile-an-hour highway range test with that. Last week, I posted the video here on State of Charge. The vehicle has an EPA combined range rating of 294 miles per charge. Its highway EPA range rating is 286 miles per charge. Well, I finished up with 285 miles from 100% down to zero, and a 3.0 mile per kilowatt hour consumption rate, which was fairly impressive considering I started the range test at about 26 degrees. Now, the temperature did get up to 41 degrees. I started it very early in the morning, but we had an average temperature in the mid-30s. Not brutally cold, but definitely a winter range test. And to get 285 miles, I thought was a win for the Taycan 4. But not everybody drives at 70 miles an hour. Some people drive faster, some people drive slower. So I asked Porsche if I could have the vehicle for a few more days and repeat the range test at 80 miles an hour and then at 60 miles an hour and compare the difference. I did that. And that's what we're going to do here today. We're going to talk about the comparison of driving a Porsche Taycan 4 from 100% down to zero in winter conditions at 60 miles an hour, at 70 miles an hour, and at 80 miles an hour. So let's get into it. Okay, before we start, I want to specify that the Taycan I did the range test with has the larger of the two battery options, the battery that Porsche calls the Performance Plus battery pack. They also sell a Performance battery pack, which is smaller and doesn't go quite as far. So let's take a minute to review the two different battery sizes, the usable capacity as well as the total capacity, and also the comparison between the old Performance and Performance Plus battery packs. Last year in 2025, Porsche upgraded the Taycan's battery, gave it a totally different battery pack, and it was larger. It had more capacity. So let's take a quick look at the capacity from the first few model years, from 2020 to 2024, and now the battery pack that you get now that started in 2025. Okay, so let's take a look at the two battery options for the 2020 to 2024 Taycan, which Porsche called the J1 Taycan. The Performance battery pack, which is the smaller of the two, had a total capacity of 79.2 kilowatt hour. Of that, 71 kilowatt hour was usable. The larger Performance Plus battery pack had a total capacity of 93.4 kilowatt hour, usable capacity of 83.7. Now take a look at the new battery pack that Porsche introduced last year. They call this model the J12. The performance battery pack now has a total capacity of 89 kilowatt hour, almost 10 additional kilowatt hour, and a usable capacity of 82.3 kilowatt hour, more than 10 kilowatt hour accessible than the previous performance battery pack had. And the Performance Plus, which is the one that was in the vehicle I range tested, the larger of the two options, has a total capacity now of 105 kilowatt hour and a usable capacity of 97 kilowatt hour. So that's a little more than 13 kilowatt hour more of usable battery capacity than the Taycan previously had in the J1 version. Today's video is sponsored by EVChargingStations.com. If you drive an electric vehicle or you're planning to, this site is packed with comprehensive charger reviews, detailed DC fast charging graphs, and the latest news from all of the fast charging networks. You'll find real-world testing, easy to understand comparison, and deep dives into how different electric vehicles actually charge. Before you buy an EV charger or plan your next road trip, make sure to bookmark EVChargingStations.com and make smarter charging decisions. Okay, so I said that after my 70 mile an hour highway range test, I repeated the range test at 60 miles an hour and 80 miles an hour. That's kind of true. I actually had State of Charge Pete, who works for me here at State of Charge, do the 60 mile an hour and 80 mile an hour range tests for me. But Pete knows the protocol. We use the exact same protocol. We make sure that the climate control is set at the same temperature, that the vehicle is in the most efficient driving mode, which is the range mode for the Taycan. We lower the suspension down to the lowest suspension setting, and just in general make sure that everything that was done at 70 miles an hour was done when we repeat the test at 80 miles an hour and 60 miles an hour. So let's take a look at the test that Pete did the next day after I did my 70 mile an hour. He did the 80 mile an hour test. Let's take a look at the results. Okay, in that test, Pete had a starting temperature of 41 degrees Fahrenheit and an ending temperature of 36 degrees Fahrenheit. So it was a little bit warmer than the temperature when I did the 70 mile an hour range test. Not much warmer, but we do need to note that it was a little bit warmer. All right, in the first quarter of the range test, from 100% down to 75%, Pete went 72 miles and had a consumption rate of 2.8 miles per kilowatt hour. From 75% down to 50%, he went 69 miles for a total of 141 miles at the halfway point. And at that point, he had a consumption rate of 2.7 miles per kilowatt hour. From 50% down to 25%, he went 67 miles. He was at 208 miles when the battery hit 25%, and now the consumption rate was back up to 2.8 miles per kilowatt hour. And from 25% down to zero, he traveled 62 miles, the least of all four legs. He was at 270 miles with a consumption rate of 2.8 miles per kilowatt hour. That's what he finished up the range test with. 270 miles with a 2.8 miles per kilowatt hour rating. That was 15 miles less than what I went, and his average consumption was 0.2 of a mile per kilowatt hour greater than it was when I drove at 70 miles an hour. Okay, so going 10 miles an hour faster, from 70 miles an hour up to 80 miles an hour, only caused a 15-mile penalty with the Taycan. I was really surprised with that. I told Pete when he got in the car, figure on you're going to be at somewhere around 255 to 260 miles. And the fact that he got 270, that was pretty impressive. And it really shows that the Taycan is definitely designed for high-speed driving. It's a very low-slung sedan with great aero, and it was designed to cheat the wind. So that actually really surprised me. I had figured it would be at least 20 to 25 miles less when you go up to 80 miles an hour. I've done this range test with other vehicles, and typically the penalty going from 70 miles an hour to 80 miles an hour is extreme, because the extra wind resistance traveling from 70 miles an hour to 80 miles an hour typically really holds the vehicle back. But the Taycan is designed for high-speed driving, so that's why it did so well. I was super surprised with that. All right, the next day, Pete got back in the car, same time of day, and drove at 60 miles an hour from 100 down to 0. Let's take a look at the results for that. Okay, when Pete started the range test, the temperature was exactly the same as it was the day before when he did the 80 mile an hour range test. It was 41 degrees. However, this range test took a lot longer, and as the night went on, the temperature dropped more than it did for the 80 mile an hour range test. If you remember, he started at 41 degrees and he ended at 36 degrees. For the 60 mile an hour test, he started at 41 degrees and he ended at 30 degrees, so it was a little bit colder. And for this test, from 100% down to 75%, he went 96 miles, had a consumption rate of 3.6 miles per kilowatt hour. From 75% down to 50%, he went 89 miles, and he was at 185 miles driven when the battery was at 50%. The consumption rate, again, 3.6 miles per kilowatt hour. From 50% down to 25%, went 87 miles, for a total of 272 miles driven. The consumption rate, as you can see, it's not changing. It's going to be at 3.6 for the whole range test. And then from 25% down to 0, he drove 73 miles. He finished up the 60 mile an hour highway winter range test on the 2025 Porsche Taycan 4 with 345 miles driven and a 3.6 mile per kilowatt hour consumption rate. And remember, the Taycan 4 has the combined EPA range rating of 294 miles. So at 60 miles an hour, which is highway driving, albeit slow highway driving, it went 51 miles farther than its combined EPA range rating in the winter with average temperatures in the 30s on winter tires. So to me, that's an incredible accomplishment. I've range tested a lot of Taycans. I've probably done at least 10 Taycan range tests, different models. I mean, the Porsche has, at this point now, I think 12 or 14 different Taycan models. So there's a lot of different models out there, and I've range tested a bunch of them, but they consistently beat their EPA range rating. Here in the winter, at 70 miles an hour, it almost hit its EPA range rating. At 60 miles an hour, it blew way past it. So the Taycan always performs very well at highway speeds. That's unusual. Most of the electric vehicles that I do the range test with here either just barely hit their EPA range rating at 70 miles an hour or underperform from it. After all, I mean, the EPA range rating is not a good measuring stick against my 70 mile an hour highway range test. The only reason why I use it, it's the only standardized range number that I can compare to. It's not meant to tell people what they can expect at driving at 70 miles an hour or 60 miles an hour or whatever, because it's a combination of highway driving and city driving. And even the highway driving is slower than 70 miles an hour. So it's not, the EPA range rating is not a great range rating. I wish that the EPA would redo their range ratings and come up with a different system and maybe put forth 3 different numbers, kind of like, this is under best situation, you could expect this, average this, and then under the worst conditions, this. I almost think that would be much more helpful for owners, but I use it to compare at these range tests because it's the only thing that we have out there to compare with. But I want to make sure I'm not trying to hit that. I just use it because it's a fair way to compare this vehicle to the other vehicles that I've range tested. Anyway, so there we go. There's the numbers. So let's take a look at all the numbers up here on the screen. First thing, let's just take a look at the miles driven in each segment of all 3 of the range tests. This is something that's really interesting to me because I've noticed it in my previous Porsche Taycan range tests. I think it's held true in either every Porsche Taycan range test I've done or nearly every Porsche Taycan range test I've done. But in every quarter of the range test, the vehicle doesn't go quite as far as the previous quarter. Take a look at what we have here. Look at the 80 mile an hour range test. 72 miles, then 69 miles, then 67 miles, then 62 miles. The 70 mile an hour range test, 76, 72, 69, 68. And then the 60 mile an hour range test, 96, 89, 87, and 73. So in each quarter of the range tests, you don't go quite as far as you do in the previous quarter. So understand, when you're at 50% with your Taycan. If you drove from 100% down to 50%, you're not going to go as far from 50% down to zero as you did at 100%. I know a lot of people might use that metric when they're on a long road trip. I know I do that. If I charge to 100%, I'm going on a long road trip, I look at where I'm at 50% and say, okay, I could pretty much figure on going about that far for the second half of the trip. If I really want to really squeeze out as much range as I can and charge at a super low state of charge. I know everybody doesn't do that, but some people do. I certainly do when I'm on long road trips. You can't do that with the Taycan. You will not go as far from 50% down to zero as you do from 100 down to 50%. And again, I said, it's not just this one particular vehicle I have. I've noticed this with almost all the Taycans that I've range tested. And look at the consumption rate. At 80 miles an hour, it was 2.8 miles per kilowatt hour. Not terrible for driving 80 miles an hour. 70 miles an hour, 3.0. 60 miles an hour, it jumps all the way up to 3.6 miles per kilowatt hour. That seems to be the speed that really makes a difference with highway range tests. And I've noticed this with even the other vehicles that I've range tested. Once you get down under 70 miles an hour, your range goes up a lot. And with the Taycan, it was no different. I mean, we didn't see much of a difference between 70 and 80 miles an hour. But look at from 60 and 70 miles an hour, 345 miles at 60 miles an hour compared to 285 miles. So that's a huge difference and a huge difference in the consumption rate. Again, I do want to point out that it was slightly warmer when Pete did the 60 mile an hour range test compared to when I did the 70 mile an hour. So that probably maybe accounts for 10 miles of difference there. But the results speak for themselves. If you really need to get somewhere and you don't have enough range, you don't think you can make it to a charger or to your destination, if you could just slow down, it's going to add an incredible amount of range to your vehicle. Look at the difference between 70 and 60 miles an hour. I know a lot of people don't want to drive on the highway at 60 miles an hour, and a lot of people say, oh, I'll get run off the road. No, you won't. If you park yourself in the slow lane and go 60, 65 miles an hour, even if the speed limit is 70 miles an hour, 75 miles an hour, I know in some parts of the country, you're not going to get run off the road. You'll be fine. A lot of people say that in the comment section, but I've driven on roads all over the country, and yes, people are going faster, particularly in the left lanes, but if you park yourself in the slow lane, just on the times when you need to make that destination, you're afraid because the range is starting to get a little dicey and there's no chargers on the route, slow it down a little bit. It makes a huge difference, and you'll make it to your destination if you just take it down a few notches, particularly in the winter when you don't get the range that you normally get when the battery is warmer. All right, well, that's all I have here today for the Porsche Taycan 4 Highway Winter Range Test Comparison. I thought the results were super interesting. I hope you did also. Please drop your questions and comments in the comment section below. I try to get to as many comments and questions as I can. And if this is your first time here at State of Charge, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming electric vehicle news and reviews. And as always, thanks for watching.